मांडूक्य रहस्य विवृति, a Sanskrit book by Sri 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 Sachidanandendra Saraswati Swamiji, HoLenaraseepur. So, in this we have started one session finished. Today's is the second session. The introductory part in English we are seeing. After that, the Sanskrit work of the Swamiji we will be seeing with the translation. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Shri Ganeshaya Namaha. Now, the alleged influence of the Madhyamika on Vedanta. Madhyamika is one sect of Buddhas, that is Bauddhas. Madhyamika, Mahayana, Hinayana, etc. Professor T.R.V. Murthy, the author of the Central Philosophy of Buddhism, is the second of the two scholars I have alluded to above. He views the matter from a totally different standpoint. He hesitates to decide the question once for all and suspects a possible influence of the Madhyamika on the development of Vedanta, and strengthens his opinion by remarking that we have undeniable evidence of Madhyamika and Yogachara influence on in the Mandukya Karikas. With regard to the first three chapters, however, he notes that nothing is said to which any orthodox Vedantin could take exception as regards language and logical content. At the same time, he observes that no Vedanta writer has quoted from the fourth chapter, while verses are quoted from the first three. Bhava Viveka and Shantarakshita have also quoted in their exposition of Upanishada school from this part alone. The professor depends upon almost entirely on Professor V. Bhattacharya for the interpretation of Book 4. His own surmise is that it can be considered as an attempt to synthesize the two schools of Mahayana. On internal evidence alone, we may treat the Alata Shanti Prakarana of the Mandukya Karikas of Gaudapadacharya as an independent work written most probably by a Buddhist, what he says. Having cut the Gordian knot in this manner, the professor proceeds to formulate his final position. Thus, it is our contention that there could not be a acceptance of any doctrinal content by either side from the other, as each had a totally different background of tradition and conception of reality. Consistent with the above contention, we can only expect the Vedantin to have profited by the technique or method of Madhyamika. We may readily concur with the professor when he says that Gaudapada has profited by the technique or even the method of the Madhyamika. But the question is, to what extent exactly did either of these items profit that matter? Was he wholly indebted to the Buddhist? What were the circumstances that drove this profound thinker on Vedanta to seek assistance from sources professedly of an alien tradition? Was there nothing in his own tradition to look to in this matter? These questions, I think, must be answered satisfactorily first, before we jump to conclusions based mostly on conjectures. Next point, third one, pre-Gaudapada Vedanta as the precursor of absolutism. Professor Murthy admits that if the independence of the books, especially of Book 4, were accepted, it alters our contention with regard to the alleged borrowing. We have no direct textual evidence for that. We can only presume and conjecture from the acknowledged priority of the Madhyamika and Yogachara Advayavada to the Advaita of Gaudapada and Shankara, and from the absence of such a trend in their predecessors. We have seen that we could not agree with those who consider all the four books to be independent treatises. The first three chapters may be left out of consideration for our present purpose, since the professor is convinced that they are Vedantic. It is only on the evidence of Book 4, therefore, that we have to examine the nature and extent of the Madhyamika influence on Gaudapada. Whether or not it is Gaudapada's work is just the moot point here. The conjecture that it may be the work of a Buddhist we shall pass over, for we have no positive evidence for that except that no Vedantic writer is found to have quoted from it. But an argument from silence of this nature cuts both ways, for no Buddhist writer has appealed to or even made a passing reference to it as a Buddhistic work either. That Gaudapada has discussed nothing directly of the Vedanta, even if true without any qualification, is not to the point either. For Shankara and his followers have all along been contending that this chapter is mainly for adducing an indirect proof of the Vedantic position emerging out of the internal differences on crucial points of vital importance among the scholars not subscribing to the conclusions of Advaita. We shall therefore assume that the work is from that author's pen and try to investigate how far and for what reasons he has taken over the technique and method of the Madhyamika. To take up the second point first, that is the method of Madhyamika, Professor of Murthy observes that pre-Gaudapada Shankara Vedanta is Ekatmavada, monism. It is not Advaita, absolutism. It did not formulate a theory of appearance, Vivartavada. No need was felt to draw the distinction between the Paramartha and the Vyavaharika or the texts into para and apara. It is only with regard to such points that he suspects Madhyamika influence on the Vedantin. He, the Vedantin, had before him the Madhyamika distinction of the Paramartha and Samvriti of texts into Nitartha and Neyartha. He is teaching the real by the method of negating the unreal appearances, etc. The Madhyamika and Yogachara also had a theory of illusion to account for the emergence of appearance. Knowledge of this term in Buddhism must have sent the Vedantin back to his own texts and enabled him to perceive the truer meaning of the Upanishads in Advaitism. We shall take up these points one by one. We shall see first of all whether there was an unexpected revolution in Upanishad thought ushered in by Shankara and Gaudapada, or whether owing to its own inner dynamism the Upanishadic tradition too was heading towards absolutism. The latter is proposed by the professor just as a plausible hypothesis, but dismissed as unworthy of consideration on the score of its impossibility. There was not much development in the Upanishad school. It produced a considerable amount of exegetical literature and evolved a Mimamsa, but as regards originality and striking a new path, it remained stagnant and sluggish. But this appears to me to be rather a hasty conclusion. Sureshwaracharya in his Varadaranyaka Bhashya Vartika, especially in the Sambandha Vartika, exhibits a number of monistic schools contending with one another for the first place in Vedantic tradition. Not all of them were Parinamavadins teaching modification of Brahman, or schools teaching Videha Mukti, liberation after death, in preference to Jivan Mukti or release in this life. Notable among these are schools which teach, first one, Bheda Vilaya or Prapancha Vilaya, dissolving the universe to attain unity of Brahman. Second, Vasana Nirodha or destruction of the haunting impression of the reality of the three states, waking, dream and some sleep. Third one, Jnana Vidhi or Vedic injunction of knowledge. Fourth one, Prasankhyana Vidhi or injunction of continued practice of right knowledge supported by ratiocination in order to make the knowledge of the non-dual Atman strong enough to resist avidya. Fifth one, Sakshatkara Jnana or continued practice of indirect knowledge gained through scripture in order to materialize it into realization. Some of these monistic schools are found to be taken up for refutation in Shankara's Bhashya also. Can it be maintained in the face of this seething unrest among the followers of the Upanishads that the absolutism of Gaudapada could not possibly have been the result of a gradual unfoldment from within the Upanishadic monistic teaching itself. Next, absolutistic trend in the Upanishads. Fourth point. Professor Murthy asks, pre-Gaudapada Shankara Vedanta is monistic, not Advaitic. How could it suddenly take an absolutistic turn? We have seen that the emergence of absolutism was by no means so sudden or unnaturally abrupt. There were a number of antecedent fermenting streams of thought tending towards it. But even in their absence, it is easy to see that absolutism need not have waited upon extraneous aid for its appearance. There are ample signs of absolutism in the Upanishads themselves. A shrewd eye like that of Gaudapada might very well discern this tendency in those ancient revelations which mostly commence with or culminate in rejecting all duality or difference in Brahman. Akayamavranamastnaviram Ishavasya Upanishad, 8th mantra. अशब्दमस्पर्शमरूपमव्ययं काठकोपनिषत् 1.3.14 यत्तदद्रेश्यमग्राह्यं मुण्डकोपनिषत् 1.1.6 तदच्छायमशरीरमलोहितं प्रश्नोपनिषत् 4.10 नान्तः प्रज्ञं न बहिः प्रज्ञं माण्डूक्य 7th अदृश्ये अनात्मे अनिरुक्ते अनिलयने अभयं प्रतिष्ठां विन्दते तैत्तिरीयोपनिषत् 2.7 एकमेवाद्वितीयं छान्दोग्योपनिषत् 6.2.1 अपागादग्नेरग्नित्वं वाचारम्भणं विकारो नामधेयं छान्दोग्योपनिषत् 6.4.1 अस्थूलमननु बृहदारण्यकोपनिषत् 3.88 अथात आदेशो नेति नेति बृहदारण्यकोपनिषत् 2.3.6 Such persistent denial of duality in Brahman, the only possible source of all, and declaration of all duality as apparent, should have been quite sufficient to suggest and persuade a reflective mind that absolutism is the goal of all sacred teaching. We may now turn round and put this question. The ancient Buddhistic canon mostly taught the ephemeral nature of the universe and presented a rigorous chain of antecedents and consequences in all phenomena. How could the founder of the Mahayana system suddenly rise to the idea of Naiswabhavya or essenceless of things? True, he had a number of Prajna Paramita works to guide him, but they were mostly religious and mystical treatises with no philosophical flavor about them like the Upanishads. Could we not suppose that the Buddhistic denial of the pluralistic phenomena and the tendency to trace them all to a Dharmadhatu took its cue from the Upanishads? Most of the eminent Mahayanist philosophers, including Nagarjuna, and were Brahmins who had no doubt imbibed the Upanishadic teaching, which reiterated the negation of the reality of the phenomenal world in no uncertain terms. Would it be a very long jump to suppose that when they were converted to Buddhism, which from its very inception denied the Atman or Brahman, they naturally incorporated the rejection of reality of phenomena into the new teaching with due adaptation? I am not altogether alone in making this surmise. This is what Professor Dasgupta writes in his History of Indian Philosophy. I agree with the late Dr. S.C. Vidyabhushana in holding that both the Yogachara system and the system of Nagarjuna evolved from the Prajna Paramita. Nagarjuna's merit consisted in the dialectical form of his arguments in support of Shunyavada, but so far as the essentials of Shunyavada are concerned, I believe that the Tathata philosophy of Ashwagosha and the philosophy of Prajna Paramita contained no less. And with regard to the Tathata philosophy itself, the professor remarks as follows: this doctrine seems to be more in agreement with the view of an absolute, unchangeable reality as the ultimate truth than that of nihilistic idealism of Lankavatara. Considering the fact that Ashwagosha was a learned Brahmin scholar in early life, it is easy to guess that there was much Upanishad influence in this interpretation of Buddhism, which compares so favorably with the Vedanta as interpreted by Shankara. I do not mean to endorse or emphasize all that Professor Dasgupta had said here, but the conclusion seems irresistible that the early Sanskrit writers of Mahayana may have taken some hints from the Upanishads in respect of holding the ideal or unreal nature of the universe. It does happen very often that the tables are turned in making guesses on insecure basis, but I do not like to be a partner in such games. On the whole, I perfectly agree with Professor Murthy in thinking that it is a matter of conjecture and presumption whether and to what extent there had been borrowing on either side. This is the HoLenaraseepur Sri Sri Sachidananda Saraswati Swamiji's teaching, or what he says, his opinion. Next, fifth one, was there a school, Advaitic absolutism, anterior to Gaudapada? That's the next point. That we shall see in the next session. Hare Rama. Acharya Gaudapada Charanaravindar Arpitamastu. Govinda Bhautpada Charanaravindar Arpitamastu. Bhagavan Adi Shankaracharya Charanaravindar Arpitamastu. Sri 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 Sachidananda Saraswati Charanaravindar Arpitamastu. Subraya Sharma Ji Charanaravindar Arpitamastu. सर्वे जना सुखिनो भवन्तु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु। ओम तत्सत्। ब्रह्मार्पणमस्तु।